Good evening, everybody. I'm Kim Coble, Executive Director for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and I'm really pleased tonight on behalf of our board and our staff to welcome Leader Hoyer and thank him for joining us today for what I know will be both an informative and important conversation about the Build Back Better initiative. I also want to thank you, the participants, for joining us. These initiatives don't get passed and don't get advanced without our engagement. So it's really important that we hear from the Congressman about how we can help him make sure this initiative gets going. And lastly, I want to thank our partner organizations, the NAACP, Smart Growth Maryland, Potomac Conservancy, the Climate Exchange, Strong Future Maryland, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Blue-Green Alliance. Today, what we're going to do is I have a few housekeeping remarks to make, and then I'm going to turn it over to Leader Hoyer, who's going to make some opening remarks. We're going to have some questions and answers from us asking the leader questions and him responding. We are also going to be taking questions from you. So at the bottom, you will see the question and answer tag. Please write in there your questions, and we have staff that will make sure that they get presented to the leader. And after we get through the question and answer, Leader Hoyer will make some closing remarks, and I, being a good conservation voter advocate, are going to leave you with some specific key actions that you can take to help advance the Build Back Better initiative. Let me start with a few important points about the Build Back Better initiative. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the country to make investments in climate change, creating clean energy jobs, and prioritizing justice. I want to remind you that in Maryland, because of our shoreline and our low-lying areas, we are particularly vulnerable to the climate change impacts. This plan will help us, put the country on a path to 100% renewable energy. It's going to create the new Civilian Climate Corps. And it has a provision called Justice 40, meaning that the plan targets 40% of the benefits from the investments to disadvantaged communities. Lastly, it will upgrade and modernize America's drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems with a focus on green infrastructure and nature-based systems. According to recent polling, 83% of Maryland voters across the state support the American Jobs Plan and believe it's important that Congress takes action to address climate change. Some of you might have joined us last month for our town hall with Senator Van Hollen. Since that time, a lot has changed, and we're really pleased that Leader Hoyer is going to be here to discuss that, the negotiations that are going on in Congress with us. But as an overview, there are two pieces of the Build Back Better initiative. One is a bipartisan framework, and the second is a budget reconciliation package. And it's imperative that Congress passes both of these, takes both tracks to address the problem of climate change. Fortunately, President Biden, Majority Leader Schumer, and Speaker Pelosi have committed to including this two-track process to get it done. And the main difference here is that the bipartisan agreement contains important investments in infrastructure, but it does not address climate. And that's why we need the budget reconciliation package, which makes investments that cut emissions by at least half by 2030 and puts our nation on a path to 100% carbon-free energy and helps power our electric grid, our cars, our buses, and buildings, all by 2035. So without further ado, it is an honor to have Majority Leader Hoyer with us today. He's been a champion for Maryland and Marylanders for a long time. He started in the state Senate in 1966. 9 years later, was president of the state Senate. He's represented District 5 in Congress as a representative since 1981, and he is now the majority leader in the House of Representatives. His environmental credentials are long. He's been a longtime champion for clean water, the Chesapeake Bay. He's co-sponsored and championed environmental bills for decades, ranging from everything to supporting farmers to helping address Pfiesteria, which was an outbreak back in the 1990s. And he's helped add green space across the country, but more importantly here in Maryland by helping to add 8,000 acres to the Patuxent Wildlife Refuge, expand the Piscataway Park, and he has been indispensable and an indispensable champion in advancing the Great American Outdoors Act. He's been a long-time advocate for public transportation and secured funding for commuter bus systems as well. And I'm very proud to say, in 2020, he received 100% on the LCV scorecard and has a lifetime average of 82%. So with that, Leader Hoyer, thank you for joining us.
Well, Kim, thank you very, very much for that very nice introduction. I appreciate that very much. And I'm so glad to be with you and with Ben, who's your Government Affairs Director. And thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for all those who are with us today, not in the same room, but in the same box, as I say. We may not be in the same room, but we're in the same box together here. This technology is wonderful. I was the one that had a little trouble with the technology today, not the league itself. So I'll take the blame for being a little delayed. But I'm very pleased. I know Chris Van Hollen spoke to you last month, and I know it was a really good meeting. And I'm glad to be with all of you this evening, and I hope that next time we can all meet in person, of course. And I don't know the average, but we have 7 Democrats and 1 Republican in the House of Representatives and 2 Democratic United States Senators. And I would think that 82 may be low among the 8. I don't know, Kim. I haven't seen the figures, but I think we may have all been 100% last year, and I think we're going to be the 7 is going to be 100% this year. So I'm pleased to be with all of you. Now, let me say, the book started in the Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Let me reverse that and say, it may be the worst of times and the best of times. What I mean by the worst of times, of course, is that we have an existential threat to our very lives and the health of our globe, our small little spaceship, as Governor Brown called it on the first Earth Day, that gives us breath and life and food and sustenance. And that's at risk, a very real risk. And there's some, unfortunately, who deny that risk and have therefore ignored the necessity for responses. But I think it's also the best of times, and Kim just outlined why it's the best of times. Because we have a president, and very frankly, we have congressional leadership that absolutely accepts the fact that it is absolutely essential, not a good thing to do, not something that would be better than not doing something, but essential to do for the health and welfare of not only our own citizens, but the citizens of our global community. And thankfully, we're well on our way to being able to do that as a result of the very successful vaccination campaign here in Maryland, which was helped substantially by President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which was an extraordinary piece of legislation. Almost $2 trillion of spending to make sure that we dealt with the direct, immediate COVID-19 threat to our health, and to our economy, and to the welfare of our families. And we dealt with many of those issues. And we're on Thursday going to celebrate the fact that we extended child care payments. And that first child care payment, we're going to take 50% of America's children who are living in poverty out of poverty through the child tax credit legislation. So the best of times in that sense. But we need to keep working. I was proud to bring that plan, the rescue plan, to the floor as majority leader and work to secure its passage. We still have a lot of work to do, of course, and only one party voted for that bill, unfortunately, because that should have been an overwhelmingly bipartisan effort. And therefore, given that fact, we have, as I said, a lot of work to do in order to get shots into arms before this new Delta variant spreads in our communities and affects those who are not yet vaccinated. But we have much to be positive about right now as our economy reopens, as schools prepare for more in-person classes this fall, and as hospitals report fewer COVID-19 patients. Although sadly, we're seeing a spike among those populations who have made a decision not to get vaccinated. The American Rescue Plan was about turning around the COVID-19 crisis. Now, what Kim is talking about is the American Jobs Plan and also the American Family Plan, because we knew that we needed to step in immediately for the short-term challenges confronting our families and our people, and indeed the globe, because the COVID-19, like climate change and global warming, is a threat to us all. We are on one little spaceship. President Biden's American Jobs Plan is about building back better, as Kim mentioned. It's a great phrase. I have a phrase that I call "make it in America," which is complementary to that, and the president and I have talked about. Build back better and stronger so that working families and small businesses can succeed to get ahead through access to opportunities. But the jobs plan also addresses the other clear and present global danger that has serious local repercussions. And that, as we're going to talk about, is the climate crisis. Not the climate challenge, the climate crisis that demands action. The jobs plan makes transformational investments in infrastructure and in helping communities respond to climate change. No part of our country is being spared the effects of the climate crisis as we are seeing. The Pacific Northwest is baking, literally, under an unprecedented heat wave. Deadly and damaging strong storms continue to hit the East Coast more frequently than in years past. Last year alone, the United States faced 22 extreme weather and climate-related disaster events, with losses exceeding $1 billion per event, a cumulative price tag of nearly $100 billion. And we know that the ultimate price, if we do not address in an effective way climate change and global warming, will be in the trillions of dollars, but even more than that, in the lives of people. The climate crisis is a here and now problem, not something we can put off, not something we can do tomorrow, not something that's theoretical. There's no more time to delay in tackling it. That's why we need to pass the American Jobs Plan to ensure that every region of our country, including the Mid-Atlantic, of course, our region, has the resources it needs to modernize and become more resilient in facing a changing climate. That means, of course, strengthening our infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, delivering clean drinking water, and ensuring the integrity of our power grid. Just this year, we've seen the vulnerability of our electrical grid to extreme weather. Texas is a perfect example, a state, unfortunately, that has been negligent in responding to the challenges that are posed by our carbon-based fuel economy. In California, we saw the extraordinary impacts of weather there as well. At the same time, the president's jobs plan calls for robust investments in cleaner energy that reduces and will ultimately eliminate carbon pollution. These include incentives for deploying clean energy, such as wind and solar power, and consumer incentives for electric vehicles. It also calls for electric vehicles charging infrastructure. Obviously, if you're going to have electric vehicles, people are going to worry about where can I make sure that I can keep driving an electric vehicle. So infrastructure like that is essential. We have to make our buildings more energy efficient. We have to put the energy industry to work plugging abandoned oil and gas wells and investing in the clean energy technologies and manufacturing base we need to lead this century. The result of these investments will be not only cleaner air and cleaner water and a healthier planet for our children and grandchildren, but also a greater economic opportunity that helps Maryland businesses save money, compete at home and overseas, and create high-paying jobs right here in our state. The bottom line is, this is not, do we choose energy efficiency and cleaning up our air and our water and our land and having a robust economy. In point of fact, they are both contingent upon one another. If we don't have a clean environment, if we don't address climate change, then our economy is frankly going to be badly damaged. But at the same time, if we believe that cleaning up our climate and addressing climate change and global warming is costing us economic well-being, our voters will be reluctant to support it for short-term goals as opposed to what are essentially long-term goals. But if we can convince our voters, as I think is absolutely the truth, and as our president believes, our president, when he thinks environment, when he thinks climate change, when he thinks policies to address this crisis, he thinks job creation, job expansion, economic growth. And that's why I'm so proud to support the American Jobs Plan, as the Maryland delegation is, your delegation. And I hope we can continue to make progress moving them through Congress against opposition from House and Senate Republicans. Now, let me talk about something that's not in my remarks, but which is critically important: the filibuster. The filibuster is a Senate rule. The founders of our Constitution never talked about having a filibuster or providing for extraordinary majorities to pass policy. Now, they provided in 4 different places extra votes to be necessary. We just went through 2 impeachments of the president. We needed 2/3 of the Senate. We got 57 in the second effort, but not 2/3. And there never has been 2/3 to impeach a president. The founders provided that we would have to have 2/3 for the Senate to approve a treaty. We also provided that we would have 2/3 to override a president's veto, and 2/3 to pass a constitutional amendment, and then 3/4 of the state. So it wasn't that the founders didn't contemplate having supermajorities, like 60 votes. It was they simply did not provide for that because they only believed those 4 items would have required a supermajority. We have to change that filibuster. But in the absence of that, we do have a process, as Kim pointed out, that's called reconciliation. And I look forward to discussing those issues that are being impeded by filibuster, including climate change, and the other critical environmental and economic issues with you today. And I'll turn it back to Kim to kick off today's conversation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Congressman Hoyer. I will admit to finding your remarks extremely inspiring. It's wonderful to have somebody at your leadership level be so articulate about climate, the impact, the importance of making those changes, making those investments, and specifically the role that this legislation has. So thank you. I'd like to introduce our partner, Dan Taylor, from the Blue-Green Alliance, which is a nationwide coalition of labor unions and environmental groups. And Dan's going to ask a question about jobs and labor. Dan?
Thank you so very much for having me. My question for you, Leader Hoyer, is what can we do to make sure whatever package is passed includes labor standards and domestic content provisions such as Buy American? We believe it's important to ensure infrastructure investment translates into good green union jobs across the economy. And I'm just curious how you see us using the supply chain to make sure that happens.
Well, Dan, let me say this. First of all, I'm a little higher on labor issues than I am on the 82. I'm in the mid 90s over a 52-year career in the Senate and in the House. But I got a pretty good environmental record too. But the president, in his State of the, what wasn't a State of the Union, but in his address to the Congress of the United States, made it very clear when he was talking about jobs, it wasn't jobs just sort of in the generality of having jobs available. It was jobs available that were labor jobs, organized workers having the right to get together to bargain collectively, because we know that what created the large middle class in our country was the ability of workers to organize and bargain collectively. So that as we create these new jobs, we want them to be good, well-paying jobs represented by unions who can argue the case collectively. Individual employees, we know, can't argue their case. So we need the protections that labor brings, that organized labor brings to jobs. So that when you say, how can we assure that? We're going to assure it because that is a commitment the president's made. It's a commitment that most of us have made throughout our careers in the Congress, and that we believe to be essential. If what I said earlier, that when we're building solar panels, when we're building windmills, when we're building infrastructure, that those jobs not only help our climate challenge, but they also lift up our people and lift up our economy. So we believe that two have to be combined. And I believe that what we've seen over the last number of years is that we have done well in creating jobs in the clean energy environment, in the clean energy industries, in the clean energy efforts. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And we're committed to that. The president's committed to that. He mentioned it in his, which was as strong a statement as I've heard a president make from the rostrum of the House of Representatives regarding a commitment to making sure that workers have the right to organize and bargain collectively and have the kind of safety and protection that they need so that they can organize. So I think, Dan, you can be convinced the Democrats in the Congress of the United States are committed to that objective.
Thank you, Leader Hoyer, and thank you, Dan. I'd like to introduce Ben Alexandro, who's our Water Program Director at Maryland LCV. And Ben is going to be giving some questions that are coming in through the Q&A. So to participants, if you have any, please type in your questions under the Q&A and we'll try to get them to Speaker Hoyer. Ben?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity, Leader Hoyer. We've had quite a few questions, dozens of questions come in. We won't have time to get to all of them, unfortunately, and some of them you've already answered, but we do have some good ones. Like, for example, we have from Milton here, from a constituent from Fort Washington, asking about how many real dollars will really be included in terms of climate issues and environmental issues in the bipartisan infrastructure package. Can you give a little bit more details on the how and when these things will be distributed?
Yeah, well, when they'll be distributed is we got to pass the bills first. But let me just give you an idea. We have to pass the bills, and I didn't get into it in detail. We want to pass we now have a bipartisan agreement, almost $1 trillion in the United States Senate, with hopefully sufficient numbers of Republicans to sign on. All the Democrats hopefully will be on board. Add 10 Republicans and we can get to the 60 vote margin. Reconciliation, you cannot do all the policy issues that you want to meet the climate crisis in reconciliation, because reconciliation is a relatively narrow process which has budget impacts, not simply policy impacts. That in that instance will only require 51 votes to pass. That's why it's so critical. That's why it's so critical that we do the infrastructure package. And, you know, we passed an infrastructure package, approximately $750 billion. The Senate bipartisan agreement, which the president has endorsed, is about that. And if the Senate passes that, we'll hopefully go to conference and put those together pretty quickly and take the best of both. So the number may be higher. But that does not mean that we cannot pursue reconciliation diligently, because we've got to do some of the money in reconciliation that will allow states, localities, and the federal government to spend the kinds of dollars that are necessary. Now, let me give you just an example. The bipartisan infrastructure framework it puts $250 billion in climate-related investments. $250, $250 billion. So it's not chump change. Public transit, $48.5 billion. Passenger and freight rail, $66 billion. Electric vehicle charging stations, I talked about that. We want electric vehicles. And by the way, one of the things we also want to do is make sure the electricity that those vehicles are using are produced through environmentally friendly processes. And that's why the clean energy standards are so very important. As a matter of fact, the tax incentives could reduce, for clean energy, could reduce carbon emissions by 70% by 2031, according to some experts. In any event, EV charging infrastructure, $7.5 billion. Now, obviously, the private sector will also be involved in that. When you drive up to, in our state, to a Wawa, they have gasoline, but they want you to come inside and buy their products. Well, they're also going to want you to come inside if you have an electric vehicle and buy their products. So we think there'll be a partnership there and an incentive for the private sector to do this as well. Electric buses and transit, $7.5 billion. Electric infrastructure, grid authority, $73 billion. And resilience, $47 billion. Now, in total, in the American Jobs Plan, there's approximately $621 billion on transportation issues. So that's obviously not, that's more than has been included in these two bills. But as I said, from a dollar standpoint, there are things we can do in reconciliation. Policy is tough, but dollars are available to pass the Senate with a 50 vote plus one margin. So that's where we're going. Those are some of the numbers, not all the numbers, but in clean water, obviously there are substantial dollars in the jobs plan, broadband, housing, childcare. Water is $111 billion on its own. Flint was the tip of the iceberg, right there, just the tip of the iceberg. Flint was a national disgrace and a Michigan disgrace, but you and I both know that that is occurring all over the country where you have aging infrastructure. So very substantial, going to be in the bipartisan bill and even more in the reconciliation bill.
Thank you so much.
Ben, why don't you ask if we have another short one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this question is coming in from actually Transit Choices and asking about, in order to address the inequities of structural racism by improving Baltimore's public transit system, we need to make improvements, both large and small, including money for modernizing and modernized fleet, maintenance workers, and infrastructure. So how will this new infrastructure and jobs bill address some of these needs?
Well, money. There's money in there. The 40% issue that is included in the president's program will invest money in assuring that communities that have been disadvantaged, and there's money in there, for instance, to do infrastructure to bring communities that were divided by highways, bring them together in a way that you have easy access, so that there is a real understanding that we have to do infrastructure and climate investment with concern to our vulnerable communities, whether it's air pollution, water pollution. Flint, of course, a minority community, children put at great risk, and unnecessarily so. And of course, some people have been convicted of criminal wrongdoing in that instance. But there is substantial investment to accomplish the objectives of making sure that we are sensitive to the vulnerable communities who may not have the political clout to make a voice about our children being put at risk, our heirs being put at risk. You're putting things next to our communities that are risky and not in the suburbs where it would be, there's more space and more safety. So that I think there's a real recognition that our past policies have not been as sensitive to the vulnerable minority communities that they should have been. And as a result, we see great health disparities between our, COVID-19 has made it so crystal clear that there is a substantial health disparity in terms of incidence and outcomes in minority communities. This is a part of that effort, and we're going to be pursuing it, and it's included in the Build Back Better plan.
Thank you, Congressman Hoyer. And actually, that tees up the next question. I'm really happy and proud to introduce Stacy Hartwell from the NAACP and also one of our board members at Maryland League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. Stacy?
Good afternoon, Kim. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, Leader Hoyer.
Hi, Stacy. Thank you for your work.
Awesome. Thank you.
Stacy, I see in the back of in background, Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that I brought to the floor, and I'm very proud of that we passed within the last month, is removing the Roger Brooke Tawney statute from outside the old Supreme Court. And it was Tawney who, of course, in Dred Scott, decided that Dred Scott was not a person. And I'm said on the floor, this needs to pass because Black lives do matter. And this is, and when some people dismiss it, well, of course Black lives matter. No, Roger Brooke Tawney said Black lives did not matter. And we need to make that statement.
Good job. We're very proud of you, Leader Hoyer. Keep up the good work. Here's another one.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, thanks. We will. Justice 40 is the idea that 40% of the funding in the American Jobs Plan will go to relief efforts in local and frontline communities most affected by climate change. It is well known, however, that past federal grants, including $900 million dedicated to Baltimore's transit system, were never used as planned for the targeted inner city communities. Mm-hmm. Here's the question, sir. What specificity in language, oversight, interventions, and authority will you put in place to ensure that the funds allotted for Justice 40 targeting fence line communities will be used as intended?
My expectation, and that $900 million unfortunately wasn't fenced, as you point out, and therefore could be spent for other matters legally, which should not have been done. And we intend to make, you talk about specificity, to direct that 40% is in fact achieved. It's not a goal, it's a requirement. It's not a goal, it's a requirement. That 40% of the monies appropriated in various different areas be spent so that, as I just said in my answer to the last question, vulnerable and at-risk communities are not disadvantaged, but are advantaged by the expenditure of the dollars to enhance their communities rather than undermine their communities, and that will be a requirement, not a goal.
Thank you, Leader Hoyer, and thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Our next question is from our partner, Ruby Webube with the Preservation Maryland, and she's going to ask you a question regarding smart growth.
Good evening, everyone, and Leader Hoyer. The Build Back Better plan is committed to investing $85 billion in modernized public transit. In this investment, what actions will take place to ensure that this updated public transit will reduce urban sprawl and encourage car owners to participate in public transportation in their daily commute?
Well, of course, we're tax incentives, as you know. I just said that we believe that we continue the tax incentives that exist and add perhaps some others, that in and of itself could reduce carbon emissions by 70% in the United States of America. So what we want to do is incentivize, either through taxes or through direct grants and payments to localities, and tax incentives to individuals as we, for instance, do on cars. You know, we've had a tax incentive to buy an electric car. And so, Ruby, I think we're going to make sure that in the bill, we incentivize and in some cases require, not just incentivize, require, particularly going back to the clean energy standards, that, you know, the Trump administration substantially weakened those. We passed legislation the other day to reinstate the standards that were in place. And so those are some of the things that we can do to make sure that it's not just rhetoric in a bill, it's not just money in a bill, it is things that are actually accomplished to achieve the objectives that are intended.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before we go back to Ben with some more questions from the audience, Rosa Hance is with our partner group Sierra Club, and she has some questions on water and green infrastructure. So Rosa, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and good evening, Leader Hoyer.
Rosa, I can't hear you very well.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now all right?
A little better.
I'm zooming
I can see you.
Okay. I'm zooming in from St. Mary's County.
Oh, well, I'm in St. Mary's County, so maybe you can just come over and we can talk about it. There you
go. So living here between the Potomac and the Patuxent rivers, clean water is a top concern for people on all sides of the political spectrum, and polls show this is true across the country. What will you do to ensure that water remains a central component of any infrastructure package? Both hard infrastructure like drinking water pipes and wastewater treatment plants, but also flood resiliency measures such as nature-based infrastructure like wetlands, trees, aquatic ecosystems, and the Chesapeake Bay watershed.
Well, if I did the technology very well, what I would do, Rosa, is I'd lift this up and show you 80 feet from my front porch, the Patuxent River. And you couldn't rebuild as close as I am now. And the reason you couldn't rebuild is because, as you know, Maryland is a good, one of the good actors in trying to protect, as you say, the resilience, both in terms of, you know, the setbacks of 100 feet, you know, maintaining trees and foliage on the shores. 20-acre lots within 1,000 feet of the waterways, so we reduce the non-point source pollution that goes into the rivers. So Maryland has done pretty well. And as somebody who lives on the Patuxent River, and I have about 8 feet, I'm about 8 feet up, and then I have another 3 feet that I walk up into my house, and 11 feet. And very frankly, every day in February or March or January, that's 60 degrees or more, I think to myself, if we don't get on this program, my house is going to be underwater. You saw what happened in New York just the other day. So this is something that's, for me, very real and very proximate and very eminent. And so I'm going to be working very hard to make sure that in the bill, the issues that you just raised are addressed and addressed effectively, because it's very nice to build, you know, a safe water pipe, but if you're polluting the river at the same point in time, that makes no sense.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for the question. Where do you live in St. Mary's? Where are you in St. Mary's? Where you live is too personal a question. Where are you now? Oh, we lost her.
Okay. I think we lost her. Thank you, Leader Hoyer. And the Patuxent is one of my favorite rivers. So,
well, Bernie Fowler, you know, you must be a fan of Bernie Fowler's.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I did not. I just got a knee replacement about a month ago.
Yeah.
And so it was only a week, and Bernie's, you know, every summer he does his Patuxent weight in. And I've done that with him probably 20, 25 times. And this is, I think, the first one I missed in a very long time because obviously, A, I couldn't wait, and B, I could hardly walk. Right now, I'm walking fine and everything's
good.
But Bernie Fowler has raised the consciousness of America about the Patuxent River and raised the consciousness of our state, and has been a wonderful, wonderful leader. The weigh-in, of course, is totally non-scientific, but it does communicate the message.
It does communicate a message, and you know, he's a great example of the power of one person and what they can do. So
exactly.
And speaking of one person, Ben, turn it back to you for some questions from our participants.
A whole lot coming in. Here's one from Laura Rosenthal from Greenbelt saying, speaking about the clean energy standard, how can we make sure that it does not incorporate false solutions such as frack gas or trash incineration, etc.?
Well, the way we can make sure of that is follow the science. And I know that's a simplistic answer, but we got to follow the science, and we know this what the science is in terms of pollutants and carbon into the atmosphere. And while it seems to be, you know, small in one particular area, the cumulative effect can be has been very detrimental. So we just have to assure that we follow the science.
Great, thank you.
That's a simplistic answer,
here's another
but it's the
one.
accurate answer.
Here's another one coming in from, they say that they're Disability Rights Maryland. Will this legislation help our unreliable paratransit service people with disabilities and our poor bus system? And it says, thank you for your response and efforts. I know these issues are of importance to you.
I think that's a very, very important issue. Whether it is directly related to the climate issue is a question, you know, probably is not directly related. But when we talk about Build Back Better, as you know, I was the sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And of course, Building Back Better, we required when you built new, and we required transportation to be accessible. We required for reasonable accommodations to be made, reasonable expenses to be incurred to ensure the inclusion of people with disabilities. You know, I say the Disability Act is misnamed. I wish I had really thought about it. And of course, the disability, everybody called it the Disability Act, but what we ought to call it is Americans with Ability Act. And we need to make sure that they are able to access jobs. A, they can get in. B, as you point out, they can get on transportation. As you know, transportation is required to have accessible vehicles. Not every vehicle, but accessible vehicles to those with disabilities, particularly those who are wheelchair bound. So that that will be a requirement that is already included, so that in Building Back Better, the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements will apply to whatever is built back better.
Great, thank you. Here's another one that comes in from Michelle Boyle, interested in about 30 by 30, the initiative to conserve 30% of Americans' land and water by 2030. What are your land conservation priority areas to reach 30 by 30?
One of the things I'm very proud of, I brought to the floor a bill which made permanent for the first time the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that was a big, big victory for us, a huge victory for us. And I'm going to continue to make sure that we fund the acquisition. I know that Senator Bennett has a bill in the committee that's hasn't had a hearing yet that goes on that. But we also had the Great Outdoor Fund, which literally millions of acres were set aside in that bill that we passed through the House, and is I think something that is a good example of what we need to do to make sure that the generations yet to come can not only enjoy the recreational and aesthetic value of open spaces, but open spaces will enhance our environment, obviously. I have also an idea that I'm working on that my Trent Bauserman, who was at the White House with President Obama, is now on my staff as my senior policy advisor for the environment and energy. We're working on a bill that has the global community participate in essentially subsidizing the keeping of a natural resources that of our forests, like the Amazon. For instance, Saudi Arabia takes a resource out of the ground and ships it, oil, gas. What we want the Brazilians to do and the Filipinos to do and the Philippines and other in Africa, we want them to retain their forests because they provide an extraordinary service. But if you cut it down and send it to us for lumber, it may have a short term, or you cut it down and you want to have agriculture on the land, we need to provide some incentives to keep those forests in being. And the incentive we need to provide is an understanding that the United States uses the Amazon. How do we use the Amazon? We breathe the air that the Amazon helps keep clean. So I'm working on that as legislation. I'll be talking to you about that in the future.
Great. And if I have time for one more question, here's one from Mark that says, I've been hearing about the loss of important climate provisions during discussions with Republicans over a compromise. What can we do to make sure that climate components of the plan, such as electric cars, infrastructure, et cetera, can survive?
Well, elect people, and not just Democrats, but elect people who believe that those priorities are important. You know, and I'm not saying that in a partisan way. If you believe in something, our democracy requires you to go out and vote for people who also believe in something so that we can make it policy, so we can make it reality, not just an idea. So, I mean, that's, again, a simple but complicated answer. And very frankly, there is a very substantial difference. And it's not too hard to find out who's for what you're for or who's against what you're for. And you ought to act upon that. But in addition to that, that I think is the core answer. But in addition to that, if you see something that's going to be taken out and you think that's harmful, call, write, join organizations that like the League of Conservation Voters or Sierra Club or other. We have a lot of great groups on this call. Join them because the more people that are in these organizations, the more impact they have on members, because, you know, democracy works, but it only works if those of us in the citizenry make it work. You know, negligence results in bad policy.
Wow. Thank you, Leader Hoyer. Those are some really important closing remarks on your part. And I couldn't agree more about the importance of the vote. And it's the one piece of power that we hold as individuals, and something that we need to take seriously. And just to put a fine point, as a follow-up, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and in fact, all League of Conservation Voters score the elected officials. And how are they doing? Are they casting votes that advance a clean environment and healthy air and sustainable communities and environmental justice? And we also work to get them elected. And so becoming a member and supporting us and our work is helping to ensure those people get into office and we can hold them accountable. And speaking of that, I know I started out with a recognition of last year's 100%, lifetime average of 82. I am going to come out of the gates calling it 100% night for you, Leader Hoyer. Right. You've been great. Really,
well, thank you very, very much. It's really enjoyable to be with a group of people that care so much about their community. They take the time not only to participate in this 1 hour, but also day after day, week after week, month after month, because very frankly, successful advocacy means that you stay at it. Not a one-time letter or one-time call, or you see a member at a town hall and you say, I'm for this. That's good. I don't discourage you doing any of those things. Do them. But understand the successful advocate is tenacious, is relentless, if you will, in making sure that that what you think is important for our country is heard by the members who you have elected, you send to the Congress to express your voice. Now, obviously, I represent 750,000, probably a little more now. The census figures will come out pretty soon and we'll know exactly how many, but at least 750,000 people. Obviously, there were probably 750,000 views on many issues. But you can get a consensus as people continue to communicate with you. And very frankly, the people who communicate are the ones that are heard. If you just silently sit in your living room and say, that guy's a jerk, or that's a terrible issue, or whatever, you know, it may make you feel good that you expressed that opinion, but unless you get out and do something about that in a positive way, I'm not talking about negative, I'm not talking about attacking people. What I'm talking about is the most, excuse me, there's my phone. The most successful advocates are those who, there's a little book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. It's a little book, but its premise is, if I come at Kim and I say, you know, Kim, you're really you wacko, this, that, and other, you're not doing the right thing, you're a pain in the neck, stop bothering me. Well, Kim's response to me is going to be, you're a jerk, Hoyer, understandably so. But if I come at Kim and say, Kim, I really think you have some good knowledge, you got some good information, you have some strong feelings, I'd like to hear them. I may agree or may not agree, but let's talk about it. That's a pot, and Kim's response is going to be, well, that's good. And you may not agree with me on this or that, but in my case, you know, this year he agreed with me 100% of the time, and over a 50-year, he's agreed with me 82% of the time. That's not a bad average. I think some have better, but my point to you is, stay at it. Stay with the organizations you're a member of. Pay your dues. Why? Because it costs money to communicate. It costs money to participate. It costs money to run in elections. But it costs money to communicate with voters, to tell them, look, we who care deeply about the conservation and the environment believe A, B, and C, and D are good people who represent good policy. And that takes money to get that communication out. So stay at it. Make sure you know what you're talking about. You know, be knowledgeable, and organizations can give you good information about that, and be tenacious.
Well, thank you, Leader Hoyer. I just can't thank you enough. I know you're very, very busy. So to take the time for a whole hour to spend with us, we can't tell you how much it means to us. And to all the participants, I want to thank you. And to follow up on Leader Hoyer's comments, go to our website, mdlcv.org. There's some folks that are putting it in the chat and linking it. We have background information on the American Jobs Plan. We have background information on Build Back Better initiative. We have a training on how to write a letter to the editor. We have a way you can submit videos saying why now, why is it important to address climate now? And we have a petition that we're trying to get a lot of signatures on so that we can send that to Leader Hoyer and other representatives so they know their constituents care. And these are really important steps. So please go to the website, get the information, and Leader Hoyer, on behalf of all of us at Maryland LCV and our partner groups, thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kim. Good night.
Good night.